Hello and welcome to the Australia-Indonesia Centre and our webinar in collaboration with Universitas Hasanuddin and as part of the AIC's Partnership for Australia and Indonesia Research Program, or PAIR. I acknowledge the traditional owners, the Kulin nations of the land on which the Centre's office is located, and the City of Melbourne, from where I am hosting today's webinar and joined in the same city by very special guest, Professor Peter Doherty. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. The aim of the Australia-Indonesia Centre is to build on the links between the two countries. In fact, it's not just our aim, it's our mission. We bring together researchers, industry, civil society and governments to discuss some of the important issues that we're all grappling with. And we're delighted to be working with Universitas Hasanuddin and wishing them congratulations, in fact, on their 64th anniversary. Selamat atas Dies Natalis ke-64. A little later on, we do hope to hear from Professor Dwia Pulubuhu, who is the Rector of the University. But before we do that, we're going to meet our very special guest, Laureate Professor Peter Doherty, patron of the Doherty Institute and immunologist, and of course, a Nobel Prize winner. He understands immunology, he understands virus, and he understands the transmission more than many people in his scientific field at the moment. So it's an absolute delight to have him join us. Before I start chatting with you though, Professor, we have a little story for you, and this is from Dr. Sudirman Nasir, who is an AIC fellow, senior fellow. And this explains why Professor Doherty is no stranger to Indonesia. And we note that many Indonesian graduates from Australian universities are joining us for the webinar today. So I'd firstly like to introduce Dr. Sudi, who's going to tell us a little bit about the very important Australia-Indonesia connection. Welcome, Pak Sudi.
Thank you, Helen. And as Helen mentioned, actually Professor Doherty is no stranger to many of us. This event is also supported by the Indonesian Young Academy of Sciences, and a few of my colleagues in the academy are currently working with some colleagues at the Doherty Institute. And also this event is supported by the Indonesian Association of Alumni, Australian alumni. And many of us did our master's or PhD at the University of Melbourne and enjoyed Professor Doherty's talk during the PhD colloquium or during the Festival of Ideas. And in fact, those lectures are very inspiring, and to many of us, it is one of our best memory in Melbourne and in Australia. So thank you very much, Professor Doherty, for your time in joining us to celebrate Universitas Hasanuddin 64th anniversary. Back to Helen.
Terima kasih, Pak Sudi. And we're going to hear from Pak Sudi later. He will be taking the second session where we also have two other very special guests, and I'll mention those a bit later. But to Professor Doherty first, and of course we wish to talk to you about the coronavirus, Professor, but as you just heard, there are Indonesians who have strong affection for you. Did you realize you had a connection with Indonesia?
Not specifically. I should say happy birthday to the university. I didn't realize it was the 64th birthday, but I've been around so long, I'm turning 80 next month, that I think of myself as part of the living fossil record of the science of immunology. So many people know me, and I think it's a great feeling to have that sense that you have been of some value to people in general.
Professor, we have many young Indonesian scientists joining us for this event. Can you perhaps just tell us a bit about the challenges you faced when you were a young scientist and what you had to do to keep working through them to get to, the level of accomplishment that you did?
Well, I didn't set out to be a laboratory scientist, and certainly not a medical scientist, because I trained in veterinary science. And I made that decision when I was 16 years old, which is probably far too young to make any decision about the rest of your life, but that's the way things worked then. And I got into research very early. I went into veterinary science from the idea of doing research to help improve food production. If I was going to do that now, I suppose I'd probably go into the plant rather than the animal sciences. But I was growing up in the state of Queensland to our north, which is a big animal production state now as then. And so that's the direction I took. And for 10 years, I did research on virus infections. I became very interested in viruses and immunity because of various influences on me. And for 10 years, I worked on virus infections and virus diseases in domestic animals, and then went for a brief time to the John Curtin School of Medical Research in Canberra in Australia after completing a PhD in Scotland. And there, wanting to learn about cell-mediated immunity before I took a big job in the government research organisation, the CSIRO, Rolf Zinckernagel and I made a very big discovery. And that took me across into basic biomedical research, led to the Nobel Prize 22 years later, and set my career as being a basic biomedical research scientist. And after the Nobel Prize, of course, I also became much more prominent as a public figure, which is what the Nobel Prize does to you. And I spent a lot of time trying to do science communication and talking to the general public about the importance of science, while at the same time still being involved heavily in laboratory research, initially driving a lot of that research still myself, and then later stepping back and letting my younger colleagues take the lead.
And what was it like, Professor, when you received the Nobel Prize? What can you remember the feeling of that moment?
Yes, well, of course, it's an extraordinary experience, and being from the Australian culture, which tends not to be a self-celebratory culture, we tend to be not to be like that. I'd always had the sense that getting the Nobel Prize, they must have got it wrong, you know. So it was a big surprise to be on the stage with the King of Sweden. To be receiving this award. I knew we'd done the work and we were perfectly justified in receiving it. We had made a major contribution. We'd been very lucky. We made a very big discovery, and then we made a number of good guesses because the technology wasn't there to really prove some of what we were saying. We made a number of good guesses on what it meant, and we got it right. And so it was a major change, and it really changed the face of immunology. And it's had a lot of implications all through for all sorts of areas. But it was a surprise, and I knew nothing about what happened being a Nobel Prize winner. I'd met Nobel Prize winners, of course, as we all do within our scientific community, but I had no idea of what that actually meant in a personal sense.
It's not easy being a scientist. I mean, it would have been difficult back then, but now, you know, all the attention is on people with what are seen as exciting careers that put you on video, careers that other people aspire to. The role of scientist and researcher does not come up a lot. However, we've seen during the coronavirus how fundamentally important it is to have good scientists. What would you say to aspiring Indonesian scientists about persevering with their study and their career path?
Well, science is it's a passion, as any area where you go in depth with something, which is what a discovery scientist like me does. I like finding things out. I like looking at new data. And of course, over the last years, I haven't been generating that data myself. It's been my younger colleagues who are doing that. It's a kind of partnership. I learn from them and they learn from me. And that excites me and I find it very interesting. I'm not really interested in being in the public arena. I do it because I'm I'm actually reasonably good at public communication, and I'm able to speak to people, and I think I try to tell the truth when I speak. And there's sometimes a lack of truth around at the moment, as we all know. So I don't in any sense begrudge people who are celebrities. In fact, I think being a celebrity is actually pretty horrible for many people. And I think that suited me. I like to analyze, I like to write, I like to think, I like to try and understand what's behind things. And if you've got that sort of science, sort of personality, then science suits quite well, because in science, we actually find out things that nobody ever knew before. As a writer, I've written 6 books since the Nobel Prize, and another 2 in the progress. And I like to write, but I realize when I write about areas other than science, everything I say has been said before by somebody. But science, when you discover something new, you say something that nobody has ever said or known before. Now, maybe not many people care about what you've discovered, but it's a great feeling. And there's no greater excitement, in fact, than finding something new and understanding something better.
That's a great way of putting it. Thank you, Professor Doherty. We're going to come back to you, and then we're going to bring Professor Jamal from Universitas Hasanuddin into the room so that we can have a conversation. Before we do that, though, I would like to introduce you to Professor Dwia Aryatina Pulubuhu, the Rector of Universitas Hasanuddin, and also a sociologist. And she's going to welcome Professor Doherty and also present some of her views on COVID-19 from a sociological perspective. Terima kasih banyak ya, Ibu. Thank you for joining us, and please, when you're ready.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Helen.
Lovely to meet you. Selamat kenal, ya.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, that participate in the very highly enlightening event. For the beginning, as a rector of Universitas Hasanuddin, I would like to particularly welcome and express our gratitude to Laureate Professor Peter Doherty, who willing to spare his precious time with us, discuss about the importance of science in COVID-19. And also I'd like to greet to Helen Brown from AIC and Eugene Sebastian and others person from AIC, and also to the important persons as the speakers, Professor Sangkot Marzuki, Professor Irawan Yusuf, and Professor Jamaluddin Jompa, and all participants who attend this very enlightening discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy, of course, as we know Professor Doherty is one among the excellent and suitable persons in the world to talk about COVID-19. Thank you, Professor Doherty. Selamat datang, and I'm very happy to see you, even though virtually. And I hope you are in good health, and we are very pleased to celebrate our anniversary. This month is our anniversary of Universitas Hasanuddin for the 64th, with a great scholar such you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, well, Universitas Hasanuddin is one among leading university in Indonesia and the best in eastern part of Indonesia. As other university, we also try to play a very have a good role in research, including several topics that important in the currently biomedical and health, and also social and economic issues that dealing with COVID of 19 or dealing with the crisis affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, this COVID is challenge to us as a scientist to involve and play a very important role how to solve this problem. As for the Indonesian itself, we are so sad that until now we reach about 250,000 cases and a lot of them are dead. So as academicians and scientists, we have we are called to involve in solving the crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, especially to our distinguished Professor Doherty, I'm a sociologist, yes, as Helen said before. I would like to re-emphasize or to highlight that aside of sciences, action as such as social solidarity is also a best modality in coping or dealing with the crisis. Yes, science like biomedical, health, economy, and social science have to be integrated together. Science and humanities will enable us to do several recommendation or suggestion to prevent the increasing other crises affected by the pandemic COVID-19 or corona. And we know the current issue is not only limited to the health issues, but the effect of the COVID-19 that face differently among the people, especially for the one who has comorbidities and immunosuppressive system, or the group of poor people, or the group of people who stay in the remote area that have lack access to the health facility. So it's now becoming a big issues. So I think a multidisciplinary approach, it would be the best solution. Science come from different perspectives, have to engage together in order to find out the best solution. Indeed, until now, we are still waiting the discovery of vaccine that's still to be developed. But during that, we can prevent the larger impact of the crisis. To my interest in Indonesia itself, now the increasing the number of people with the new indicator become a problem to us, for the most to the government, because most people a lot of people, they lost their job, and then a lot of villagers, they cannot have access to get the treatment, and many issues, social issues are coming out affected by the pandemic. So yeah, at the same time in Indonesia, we are facing with the new big event that is a political agenda. Some areas will have the pemilu, pilkada, to choose the best leaders. At the same time, it will be affect to the increase of the patient of COVID, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think many issues could be arise when we talk about this pandemic. So, I would like to again to thanks to the time of our laureate Professor Doherty for your willingness to join and to share your perspective, and also to other speakers, Prof. Sangkot Marzuki and Prof. Irawan, as well Prof. Jamaluddin Jompa. And I believe this discussion will be enlightened, will be resulted with a very excellent perspective that we can raise a very excellent recommendation, of course, to our government and to the people. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on behalf of Universitas Hasanuddin would like to gratitude to AIC as well for your facilitation to make this discussion happen. And thank you very much for your time to collaborate with Universitas Hasanuddin. And I hope all participants, and among them, they are the very excellent researchers, could also have a good information to be shared in this discussion. Thank you very much, Helen, and let's stay safe and health, of course. Terima kasih. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Terima kasih, Ibu Dwia. Thank you so much for your words, your insight, and congratulations again to the university. Thank you for your time, and we will see Ibu Dwia a bit later on. Going to go back now to Professor Peter Doherty, who is with Melbourne University, which is also a partner university of the Australia-Indonesia Centre. So it's great to see two partner universities in the same room working with our pair researchers. Professor Doherty, we just heard then of some of the challenges facing Indonesia with tackling this disease, some very huge societal challenges. To get your scientific perspective about this disease, how complex is it compared to a usual coronavirus, if there is such a thing? What are your comments around just how challenging this virus is?
This virus is different from any we've encountered before, including, so far as I'm aware, the coronaviruses. Until the first SARS epidemic of 2002, 2003, those of us in the medical research area did not think a lot about the coronaviruses. There are some bad coronavirus diseases in domestic animals that the veterinary researchers look at, but even though I have a deep background there, I hadn't taken much notice of them. So SARS, the first SARS, much more lethal than this one, killed about 10% of people. And we realized we were dealing with something rather different, but it came across to us pretty much as a severe viral pneumonia with various complications and so forth. This infection, when it hit, initially we thought of it as kind of a severe influenza. That's the way we approached it. We thought that the disease itself would be influenza-like. It certainly was a viral pneumonia. We knew it was damaging the lungs, and the people, when they were dying essentially from lack of oxygen. Now, in influenza, people die from lack of oxygen because their lungs fill up with fluid and they essentially drown in their own lung fluid. That's what happens. But in this disease, that's not seeming to be what happens. It's also what we call a coagulopathy. And that took some time to understand. It's a respiratory infection, a pneumonia with severe lung damage, but it's also the virus, unlike influenza, gets into the blood. It infects other organs like the heart and the kidneys and the linings of the blood vessels, the vascular endothelium, and clotting is a big problem. And so people were getting strokes. And the problem with getting oxygen that was killing people wasn't so much due to a lot of fluid in the lung, it was due to the fact there were microclots in the little blood vessels where the gas exchange occurs to the lung, where the red blood cell brings along carbon dioxide and discharges that and picks up oxygen. So it's a very different and much more complicated disease than influenza. And once the doctors started to understand that, once you understand something, then you can do something about it. So once they started to understand that, they started to treat with anticoagulants when people came into hospital, and also with anti-inflammatories. And in fact, if you look at, say, the American experience, or not so much our experience because we didn't have that much experience of it, 30 to 50% more people are now surviving just because of better treatments. Not because of specific treatments, but just better treatments. So we've made a lot of progress, but we've still got a long way to go.
Professor, we have a question from the audience, which relates somewhat to your answer just then. If we could just put that up on the slide so that the professor can see it as well. That's great, thank you. And this is from Dr. Firzan Nainu, who's actually with Universitas Hasanuddin, saying that, of course, there have been 7 coronaviruses reported that have infected human populations. Now, that's what you alluded to just then. The question is, 4 have been successfully contained by the human immune system. What are the most important factors that cause the discrepancy about the ones that can be contained and the ones like this one, which are not contained?
Well, you know, we've lived all along with 4 human coronaviruses ever since we've been studying virology in the modern context. And these were discovered back in the 1960s. They are discovered, some of them were discovered in the United States, some in Britain. They were worked on by David Tyrrell from the Common Cold Research Centre. They were discovered when people were looking for viruses causing the common cold, because they wanted to make vaccines against the common cold. Then they found there are more than 100 different viruses that cause the common cold, including these 4 coronaviruses. So moving ahead to make vaccines just wasn't feasible. They were actually named by a British electron microscopist, Scottish, in fact, a lady called June Almeida, who first saw them in the electron microscope and saw the corona-like, the crown-like structures on their surface. So those human coronaviruses that cause colds, they can cause more severe disease occasionally, but they've never been a major concern for us. They have been studied, but people haven't put a lot of effort into them, and there are relatively few people who worked on them. We first became really concerned about them when SARS came along in 2002, 2003. That was a disease, again, like this, that particularly affects older people. Younger people got off more lightly often, and though it was much more clinically severe than this one across the spectrum. Then the MERS virus, it came from bats, as this one does, almost certainly, and it came through a little animal called the civet cat to us. These bat infections that are jumping into us, and there are a number of them, including Ebola and Marburg virus, the filoviruses, the henipaviruses like Nipah virus that you would know in Indonesia, and also Hendra virus in Australia, generally jumping through an intermediate host into us. Not always, but generally. Then we had the MERS virus that emerged, another coronavirus that emerged in the Middle East about 2012. It's thought to go from bats to camels to us, and then spreads between humans, as SARS did. And it got across into Asia, East Asia, and so forth. Hasn't gone really global, but I think we've had several hundred deaths from this. It's still around. It kills 30% of people, so it's highly lethal, but fortunately is not spreading as much as CoV-2. And now we have SARS-CoV-2. Now it's infecting, it's very infectious, at least as infectious as influenza. And the understanding the infection is complicated by the fact that, like the first SARS, there are what we call super spreaders. Quite a few people who get infected, we think, don't spread very much, but others spread a lot. And these super spreaders are very important in the maintaining this virus in nature. Now, the immune system seems to contain this virus pretty well, as it does with the other coronaviruses, in younger people. Occasionally it goes wrong. We do get some deaths in younger people. And as we age, we become progressively more susceptible to it. So even in our 50s, we're getting much more susceptible. In our 60s, that's very clear. 70s and 80s and 90s, it's a real issue. And of course, we have comorbidities with that vascular component. High blood pressure is a comorbidity, age is a comorbidity, diabetes is a big problem, very hard to handle from the point of view of the corticosteroids that are used for treatment. So it is contained pretty much, we think, in younger people, but we do have this incidence of what we call long haulers. These are people who are younger, who maybe have some symptoms, maybe go into hospital, maybe don't, but then they notice that they're having long-term effects, lethargy, lack of ability to exercise, oxygen problems, and some of them have really evidence of very severe heart damage. Now, we don't know how many people are in that category, but I'd say there are a significant number, and I'd say at least the number that are dying may have, but survive and are younger, may have long-term health consequences. We won't know that until we've had more time to really analyze and look. And that, of course, is what's happening now. This infection is, remember, it's less than a year old in our experience. And we are still learning an enormous amount, and we will learn an enormous amount from it and advance many things if we take the trouble to really look at what's happened here. And I think we have to do that.
Thank you, Professor. I'd like to bring our concurrent guest panelist into the room for you to meet Professor Doherty. And this is Professor Jompa from Universitas Hasanuddin. And I'll introduce him to our audience and to you so that you understand who else we are talking to in the room. It's a great panel today, a great lineup of people with expertise in different areas. Professor Jamaluddin Jompa is a professor in marine ecology and management and Dean of the Graduate School at Hasanuddin University, or Universitas Hasanuddin. He's also the first president and founder of the Indonesian Young Academy of Science. So not only has an interest in marine scientists, but an interest in encouraging young people into science and research. Thank you very much for your time, Professor Jamaluddin. It's great to have you join the discussion. I'm wondering, now that you've heard Professor Doherty for a little bit, what question do you have for him based on what you've heard so far?
I got plenty of questions. I'm not sure which one's first, but let me go with the very basic questions. As the first president of Indonesian Young Academy of Science at that time, when we had a kind of free time, outside the rooms, we look at the sky, we look at the stars, but sometimes we dream of achieving the stars. But of course, we need to be realistic. And to be able to dream ourselves to get a Nobel Laureate prizes, sometimes we feel like dreaming of achieving the stars. I'm wondering if you can just give us an inspiration, motivation on whether Indonesian scientists need to still be encouraged to be able to reach for the stars, to be able to really aim for a high quality research, a world-class research, to be one day, indeed, one first Indonesian will get Nobel Laureate. Can you give me a little bit insight on that, Professor Doherty?
Well, thank you. I did write a book on this with the facetious title, The Beginner's Guide to Winning the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
That's been translated into many, many languages, mainly because of the title, I think, which was suggested by the publisher, not by me. But basically, I used that book as an excuse. It was the first book I wrote back in 2005 to talk about the importance of basic science, the importance of investigative science, why it's a worthwhile career for those who have the right personality and the right type of dedication, and why it's so important for society to continue down this theme. We only have to realize what's happened with SARS-CoV-2 to realize how important this is. If our technology had just gone ahead to develop rapid international air travel, which is getting these viruses around the planet very, very quickly now, and is why I think this will not be the last pandemic in the lifetime of many of you. It might be the last one in my lifetime, but in the lifetime of many younger people, I think you will be seeing more pandemics. If our medical science hadn't kept up with that, we'd be in much worse shape. Our medical science is incredibly much better than it was in 2002, or what it was in 1980 when the HIV/AIDS pandemic kicked off, the other pandemic in the last 40 years. When the Chinese gave out the sequence of this virus on the about 15th of January, shortly after they isolated the virus, they sequenced it, as we do now, very rapidly because of advances in technology. Now, that always also involves advances in engineering, advances in computational biology, advances in computers, all sorts of advances lead to that. When they gave out that sequence, people started immediately to make vaccines. So from January, when we barely knew about this thing, people are starting to make vaccine candidates using various platforms, and those vaccines have moved ahead with incredible speed for a vaccine. If it had just been a matter of giving product, that is giving what we can actually make as a vaccine, we'd have been giving them now. But of course, we have to test them in humans, make sure they're safe and make sure they work. And so we don't have those answers yet. With regard to the Nobel Prizes, of course, what you need for Nobel Prizes in this type of area, biomedical research in the main, is a sophisticated research environment and a wealthy country that's willing to dedicate resources in that direction. Of course, China is dedicating massive resources in that direction, and the United States has, and we do, and in some part, and Europe and all the rest of it. How much a society should focus on that's another question, and it has to be up to the decisions of policymakers, but we can also all benefit from what happens globally because science is global. Now, personally, I think your area of marine biology and marine science is extraordinarily important, especially in the time of climate change. And we're looking at what happens with the oceans as they warm and they become more acidic. I think that's a massively important area. But there are no Nobel Prizes for marine science. There are no Nobel Prizes for geology. There are no Nobel Prizes for mathematics. So Nobel Prizes are in a very limited range of area: physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and added later, not one of Nobel's original prizes, economics. And of course the Peace Prize, which is separate. All the other prizes are awarded in Sweden. The Peace Prize is awarded in Oslo by the Norwegian Parliament, and as we all understand, is much more political, because those people who select those awardees are trying to influence global policy in many cases by selecting a Nobel Prize winner and bringing them to the fore. Now, with respect to winning Nobel Prizes, there are a lot of fantastic scientists out there doing great work. And the top ones end up being members of national academies of science and so forth, and being recognized by that for their contributions. Occasionally, some of us get lucky. We make a discovery and we get it right, and that's what leads to a Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize winners on the whole are people who made an important discovery, which is, of course, has a lot of chance to it, and then took it forward in ways that influenced and changed the way the science is done. They're called paradigm shifting experiments or studies. Occasionally you get areas where people systematically go forward and solve a problem that's out there. That's what we see in physics sometimes, and also in crystallography in our field. Sometimes they solve that problem that's been out there for a long time, but often Nobel Prize winners result from chance discovery. So that really means that you have to know your stuff. You have to be working hard. You have to have your eyes and ears open for new things, for the different result, for the different finding that disproves or that raises the exception, which may be actually the truth. So there are particular personality characteristics and particular practices that people can develop that help them to be really good at science. And sometimes someone gets lucky and they end up with a Nobel Prize.
Thanks, Professor. So a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, but luck usually comes from a lot of hard work. I think if we're all discovering as we go on in life. Can we just put up the photo of the Doherty Institute, just to remind our audience that the hard work can lead to you having a whole building dedicated to the work that you have a passion for. And this is Professor Doherty in front of the Doherty Institute in Melbourne. And Professor, we have people in the audience who've actually worked with the Doherty Institute, you might like to know. So it is another link between Indonesia and Australia. I'd like to now pick up on something that Professor Jamal mentioned, and drawing on, that Professor Doherty just mentioned about Professor Jamal's experience in marine biology. But Jamal, you led the writing of an important book that was launched in October last year called The Sciences for Indonesia's Biodiversity. And one chapter discussed environmental degradation and how that may lead to a zoonotic pandemic, which is of course zoonotic from animals to humans. That's a very basic explanation. But quite prescient that you wrote that chapter with your co-authors. How do you see the COVID-19 situation from an ecological perspective?
Thanks, Helen. It is hard to explain in a very systematic, but in short time. Can I share a little bit of my screen? Only one slide, please.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
And you're talking to, I'm a non-scientist, so if I understand it, you're fine.
Yeah, okay. Let me, I'm disabled to participate in this.
That's fine, take your time. And we're getting questions as well while you do that, but I'll just have a look at the questions that we're getting up. We're getting quite a few. We will try and get to them, rest assured.
I will start with this slide. Actually showing that what we are talking about, as Professor Doherty mentioned about this virus, it is actually not independent. It is connected to our life with our planet. It is connected to the population growth, economic growth, and also industrial growth. I think that's all creating the problems that we are facing at the moment. So we do need to understand that in order to resolve virus, I hope that we agree that this is not only a virus or viral issues. This is about multi-complex issues. We need to unravel these civilizations thoroughly, and I hope that we now become more aware of the need for working together and the need for improving the quality of our planet. Our planet is actually crying. It is suffering from what we are doing to this planet. We are burning fossil fuel all the time, creating a climate change. We cut the trees off, creating a carbon emission. We are producing a lot of pollution, so that the whole planet actually are suffering. So with this virus, I hope that we understand this is connected to what we have been doing to this earth.
Professor, so, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can actually put that slide up for you and make it a bit bigger so people can see it. So if you want to stop screen sharing, we'll put that slide up for you.
All right, sorry.
Make it easier for you. No, that's fine. I've just found out we can do that. Tidak apa ya?
Tidak apa-apa, tidak apa-apa.
Okay, yeah. Silakan ya, Pak.
This better. Okay. Let me see on my laptop. Yes. So this interconnectedness of the world problems actually was laid out by Brown in 2008, and I think when we talk about viral of this COVID-19, the cause problem, as Professor Doherty mentions very well, I just wanted to emphasize again that this is linked to what people have been doing to the earth. The conclusion there is that the population growth, economic growth, industrial growth has caused a lot of problems, pollution, climate change, and also social problems because of global capitalizations create poverty, and so on and so on. Deforestation is happening all the time, and in marine sectors, because this is what we call common property. Then we are experiencing what we call a tragedy of the common. Overfishing happening everywhere. So the balance of the ecosystem have become broken apart. So, and I think that's the beginning of, if I can move to the next slide, actually. I promised one slide, but just to make sure that what we talk about zoonosis, I think everybody knows, but the problem there is really why these germs, not only virus, but also bacteria and the rest, actually transmitted to human. Ideally, this is not, this is part of the nature. We can live in harmony, but because we have created problems, sorry, I didn't move my slide. Yeah. Then this is really special for climate change that might trigger mutation of the gene, recombination of the gene, and also the alternation of morphology of these viruses and also other germs. So I think, Helen, you're right. This is undisconnected. This is really interconnected problems to the virus. And I do wish, as an environmentalist, we increase or improve our awareness that we need to take care of this planet better. And for Indonesia, we need to be aware that we are actually what we call the natural laboratory of doing research, because we are the richest biodiversity combining with the terrestrial and the earth. You can go to the next slide. My last slide is actually we are the richest. So I hope that this is also can trigger our adrenaline as Indonesian to utilize. To the next slide, please. Yes, to optimize our capacity in really using this biodiversity as a comparative advantages, as Professor Doherty mentioned, not only marine but terrestrial biodiversity. Maybe then we can develop a solution for the rest of the world, especially in addressing the pandemic, just like what we're seeing at the moment. Thanks, Helen. I hope that answers your question.
That's fantastic. Yes, it did. Thank you very much, Professor. And then, given what you have said about the role of ecology, and Professor Doherty has alluded to climate change and these new factors that have to be taken into account, we have a question that I think is relevant from John Weaver, who says he's a veterinarian working on emerging infectious diseases. What does Professor Doherty and also Professor Jamal, I think, what do you both see as the best options for reducing the likelihood of future pandemics and addressing the political lack of commitment to long-term visioning? Well, there's two questions there. I don't know how much control you have over politics. You're welcome to answer that. But
none of us
yeah, that's right.
Control over politics, and I'm not even sure the politicians do a lot of the time. They're subject to so many different influences and pressures, and we have to have some sympathy for them on that, though not total sympathy. What Professor Jamal has said is absolutely spot on. My other great passion since the Nobel Prize has been trying to get action on climate change and on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think what I try to convince people of is exactly what he's been saying, that we are all part of interconnected ecosystems, and that the health of those ecosystems will ultimately determine the health and, in fact, the survival of us as a species. And it's as brutal as that, because we're now getting into very, very dangerous territory with climate change. We've recognized for a long time in the area of One Health, which looks at the whole spectrum of health across the planet, animals, plants, and all the rest of it in its broadest sense. We've all recognized how important and how deleterious, for instance, forest clearance is, and increasing hunger, and of course the pressures of increasing population is on the emergence of these infections. That's part of what's happening, and it's extremely dangerous, in fact. And of course, as climate change rolls on, mosquito-borne diseases, which have been moving from Africa and Southern Asia to the Americas over the last couple of many decades, in fact, And we can include in that dengue, chikungunya virus, West Nile virus, Zika virus, and so forth. Those infections will move further north and south from the equator and further up into the cooler hill and plateau regions. So that's another risk factor. And then we've also got disease factors resulting from flooding of sewage systems and all sorts of things. And then, of course, the massive effects on the oceans, which are so central to providing the oxygen that we need for life. So trying to get politicians and policymakers and business people thinking in those terms is extremely difficult. And we need to keep at it, and we need to keep pushing, and we need to keep the pressure up. And actually, with respect to ecosystems, I've been passionate about this for a very long time because of my early veterinary training, where we looked very much at the production of animals and the interaction with the landscape and soils and plants and all the rest of it. I actually think of the human body as a set of linked, interconnected ecosystems. We are complex organisms, extremely complex. And the immune system is kind of the patrolling police, if you like, of that complex ecosystem that we call us.
Thank you, Professor Doherty. And some children in the background, maaf ya, anak-anak saya di belakang ada work from home situasi itu. Professor Jamal, could I get a response from you? And then we're running out of time, unfortunately. So if you could answer that, and then I'll invite Ibu Dwia back. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. I like to, I try to be short. Talk about politician. I do believe politician is human being. Politician also Homo sapiens. We are in the same species. We live in the same planet. So I do hope that I think science and politicians need to work together, communicate better, so we can create the world better together. We cannot just allow the politicians to work in one direction and the scientists work separately in the different directions. So I do hope that we're facing this problem already, that there is no way that we can resolve this problem without understanding better the problems, the complicated issues, the complicated problems. You need the very comprehensive solution. And that's where science and scientists need to work together as well. So Helen, I believe improving communication between scientists and politicians will really produce a more and better and positive to this world. Thank you.
Professor, I will just pick up on that a little bit, because we know that Indonesia is facing a particularly challenging moment with the coronavirus. Do you think that the politicians are listening more now to the scientists about this problem and how to tackle it best?
Yeah, I think we are lucky that because Indonesia is a huge area, many area at the provincial level. We, for example, Hasanuddin University is a very respectful university in South Sulawesi, and the governor actually really listened to our scientists, not only from UNHAS, of course, but all scientists. I know that in the central government, sometimes they are difficult dealing with, because this is not only about health situation, this is about economy, this is about social problem, this is about political situation. So maybe that's the problems when they have a different perspective on the same object. So I think Indonesia has been quite well managed how to really put science into solving the problems. Of course, it's not as best as what we want as a scientist, but we keep telling the government, we keep talking to the government, and I do hope that we keep doing this in the near future, so that we can provide a better solution. And I believe the government would listen to scientists, especially if we are telling this, really without any conflict of interest at all, but to solve the problems comprehensively.
And briefly to you, Professor Doherty, to finish, do you think that the role of science is now better appreciated because of what coronavirus is showing us?
I think that basically biomedical science on the whole is not regarded as in any sense threatening by politicians. Basically, everyone wants better health. It's a popular issue within the community. Nobody wants worse health, obviously. And to get action in Australia on the health front has always been much easier than getting action on the environmental front, because often the environmental issues are in conflict with economic activity. And that's where the real problem comes in. And with basically our own behavioral changes, our own behavior, our desire to drive a big fast car and to burn away and all the rest of it. So there's no basic concept on the medical side except that it's expensive, but people do want to live healthy lives, and medical science has been incredibly successful. That across the planet, people are living longer and healthier lives because of medical science and the advances in understanding heart disease particularly, and various other problems that aren't just first world diseases, but are increasingly very important in other worlds, across the planet and across everyone. So that's fairly straightforward, but with trying to change thinking. And I think we need a basic switch to turn in everyone's head, and to say, for people to say to themselves, well, really the most important thing is that we can go on living, and that we can have a sustainable life, a life where we see the benefits around us, the benefits of the natural beauty and splendor, and the benefits we get from nature, which are very basic, down to pollinating bees, for instance. Yeah. We can't do without them. We need all these species. We can't kill all the insects. We can't kill all the bats. The bats move all sorts of nutrients around, and they're involved in pollination and moving seeds and all the rest of it, that we're all interlinked. And so if we could kind of switch the thinking in people's heads to somehow say, well, what's important to us is sustainability. What's important to us is community. What's important to us is, well, we have to get enough to eat and we have to have somewhere to live and so forth, but we really don't have to drive the fanciest car and all the rest of it. What's important to us is to have a sustainable economy, a circular economy, where things aren't just extracted, but they're reprocessed. That's what needs to happen, because the politicians are only a reflection of the body politic, which is us. And so scientists, sociologists, economists, whoever we are, we have to try and influence that process so that basically our species and many other species can continue in the long term. Because if we keep going down the present road, we know that many species are becoming extinct, and I do not think we should think that we will be an exception.
Sobering words indeed, but good words. Thank you so much, Professor Doherty and Professor Jamal as well, for that conversation. Absolutely delightful to talk to you and have your insights as well at a critical moment in the globe and how we operate and how we respond to things. That's where we'll have to leave our discussion with Professor Doherty. I'm going to ask Ibu Dwia, Professor Dwia, to say a few words. Before I do, just to let you know that we have another hour coming up in Bahasa Indonesian, and there are two very, very special guest speakers there as well. Professor Sangkot Marzuki AM, former president of the Indonesian Academy of Sciences and the Eijkman Institute for Molecular Biology, and Professor Dr Irawan Yusuf, who was formerly the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Universitas Hasanuddin. Thank you again to our guest speakers, and Professor Ibu Dwia, could you please kindly say your closing words?
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. So thank you also, of course, to Professor Doherty for your very excellent perspectives, and also the share from Professor Jamaluddin Jompa. Yes, when we talk about COVID-19, to my understanding, is very complicated because we are dealing, of course, with the discovery of vaccine, innovation, technology, and so on. But in my perspective, for Indonesian cases, it's very complicated because we are not dealing about these items as I mentioned before, but we are now facing about the lack of discipline of the most of the people in following the health protocols, including, of course, not only for the ordinary one of the people, but the officials, the government officer as well. We can, sometimes it's so in the picture that there are also without using maskers, and they are not giving a good example as well. At the same time, as I mentioned before, the problem becoming more problematic when we facing on the December for the election day in several provinces and regencies in Indonesia. Now the debate among the governments itself are very as critical issues. Some suggest to postpone, and another, including the president as well, would like to keep on the date to do the election or pilkada. So now the problem is how prepare the ordinary people to join with the election, but still on the discipline for following the health protocol. Otherwise, it can become worse. So it's another issue from social sciences, of course. And another issue in Indonesia, Helen, it's good to be discussed when we talk about how the response of government in economic recovery for the people. Because when we talk about to help people health, then we have to see how the access in general, it's not the same between the city and the village, the urbans and the villagers. They are very various in Indonesia. So that's another some issue that I would like. It's very also important to be discussed in social science perspective. And when we talk about solidarity, social capital, we are lucky and very happy giving example. Indonesia, in our university, have a task force for handling the COVID-19. And then we are so happy because the public donation coming is a lot, and we can manage to help the people, the hospitals from that donation. So it's another happy story about when deal with the COVID-19. We recognize that solidarity and social capital is still the best model for the Indonesian people. I think, thank you again, Helen and Professor Doherty and Professor Jamal Jompa. And also we are delighted to hear of course, from Sangkot and Prof. Irawan perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih banyak ya, Ibu. So nice to have you on our webinar. And again, thank you, Professor Doherty. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
And Professor Jamal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Now I'm going to reintroduce Dr. Sudi, who's going to take you through the second half of the webinar, talking about the coronavirus and the different impacts and the importance of being a scientist at this time. Pak Sudi, I will hand it over to you. Silakan ya.
Terima kasih Helen yang telah memandu acara kita pada sesi pertama dengan sangat baik dan sangat menarik. Pandangan-pandangan yang begitu mumpuni dan komprehensif dari Profesor Doherty dan juga dari Profesor Dwia dan Profesor Jamal beserta pertanyaan-pertanyaan dari audiens sangat memperkaya sesi pertama kita. Kita akan melanjutkan pada sesi kedua, namun kita akan beristirahat dulu sebentar. Dan dalam periode itu kita akan mendengar juga beberapa selingan musik. Seperti digaruk. Bapak, Ibu, dan hadirin sekalian, semoga kita telah mendapatkan penyegaran dari sesi musik tadi, dan kita akan menikmati sesi kedua ini dengan mengkontekstualisasikan dan juga merefleksikan pengalaman dan pandangan dari Profesor Doherty dalam konteks Indonesia kita hari ini untuk berusaha membangkitkan peran sains ketika kita menghadapi masalah yang sangat pelik seperti COVID-19 yang sedang kita alami sekarang dengan dampaknya yang begitu kompleks. Profesor Sangkot Marzuki dari Akademi Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia dan juga Direktur Lembaga Eijkman dan Profesor Irawan yang adalah anggota Akademi Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia dan juga mantan dekan Fakultas Kedokteran Universitas Hasanuddin akan membawa kita untuk melakukan renungan ke belakang maupun prospek ke depan. Dan untuk itu Profesor Sangkot Marzuki akan mendapatkan kesempatan pertama. Namun sebelum kita berdiskusi dengan Profesor Sangkot Marzuki, kita akan menikmati sebuah video singkat yang membawa kita pada Nusantara atau Batavia di tahun 30-an sampai tahun 40-an dan berkenalan dengan pemenang Nobel kedokteran lainnya dan ilmuwan-ilmuwan Nusantara yang juga sangat brilian di periode itu. So we are going to watch a brief video about Eijkman Institute and the atmosphere in Batavia in the institute in 1930s and 1940s before the Indonesia's independence.
Hello, saya Dr. Eugene Sebastian, Director Executive di Australia-Indonesia Center atau AIC. Melalui kesempatan ini, saya mengucapkan selamat Dies Natalis ke Universitas Hasanuddin yang ke-64. Semoga UNHAS semakin berjaya dan menjadi salah satu pilar utama pembangunan Indonesia, terutama kawasan timur Indonesia. UNHAS adalah salah satu mitra strategis AIC sejak berdirinya AIC di tahun 2014 hingga kini di fase kedua melalui program PAIR atau Kemitraan Riset Australia-Indonesia. UNHAS juga menjadi host untuk kantor kami di Makassar. Terima kasih atas kerjasamanya selama ini. Semoga hubungan kerjasama antara UNHAS dan AIC semakin erat di masa-masa yang akan datang. Terima kasih, selamat sukses.
Terima kasih Dr. Eugene Sebastian atas ucapan selamatnya bagi Dies Natalis Universitas Hasanuddin. Dan kita akan melihat video yang saya sebutkan tadi, video singkat mengenai Christian Eijkman dan Eijkman Institute di tahun 30-an dan 40-an. Oke, demikian video singkat tadi yang membawa kita ke lorong waktu untuk melihat lembaga Eijkman beberapa bulan lalu. Dan kita memiliki Prof. Sangkot Marzuki dan Profesor Irawan yang bisa menceritakan paralelisme antara Nobel yang didapatkan oleh Peter Doherty dengan sosok Christian Eijkman yang meraih hadiah Nobel di bidang kedokteran beberapa dasawarsa sebelumnya, yang penelitiannya dilakukan di Nusantara ini bersama beberapa putra-putri Nusantara. Profesor Sangkot, bagaimana kira-kira Profesor Sangkot Marzuki bisa memberikan bandingan pada kita konteks zaman yang meliputi kedua pemenang Nobel kedokteran ini yang membuat mereka bisa tampil sebagai individu yang mumpuni, yang unggul, dan pada saat yang sama mereka lahir dari sebuah lingkungan yang tentu mendukung pencapaian personal mereka yang menyumbang banyak bagi dunia ilmu pengetahuan di bumi yang kita huni ini. Profesor Sangkot, silakan.
Terima kasih Pak Sudi. Selamat pagi semua hadir di Aries pada Universitas Hasanuddin dan berterima kasih bahwa saya ikut sertakan pada acara pagi ini yang ya itu kalau kita dengar cerita dari Prof. Peter Doherty, itu intinya sebetulnya waktu ditanya apakah bagaimana Indonesia itu bisa menghasilkan hadiah Nobel, itu kembali intinya adalah sebetulnya lingkungan yang tepat, adanya adanya perangai ilmiah yang tepat, dan itulah sangat penting. Jadi kalau saya bisa masuk ke slide saya yang pertama, dari sana ya, slide-nya dari sana Pak Sudi, dari di sini saya nggak bisa share screen katanya. Ya, nah ini. Jadi kalau kita berbicara mengenai perangai ilmiah, yang topik kita pagi ini, itu saya jadi ingat kira-kira 12 tahun yang lalu, itu seorang pemenang hadiah Nobel dari Australia juga, dari Marshall, itu datang berkunjung ke lembaga Eijkman. Saya kira Prof. Irawan masih ada di lembaga Eijkman pada waktu itu. Nah, kita ini fotonya kebetulan pas sekali, ada dari Marshall, diambil fotonya, di depan gambar dari Christian Eijkman. Tadi dengar cerita dari Prof. Doherty, itu dari Marshall itu sama juga sebetulnya bahwa dia itu menemukan bakteri penyebab Helicobacter pylori, dan itu waktu dia menemukan bahwa gastric ulcer, bahasa Indonesia apa ya namanya itu, tukak lambung, itu adalah penyakit yang disebabkan oleh bakteri, itu melawan apa yang sudah dipercaya, diyakini oleh dunia kedokteran, bahwa dunia kedokteran pada waktu itu mengatakan bahwa dipercaya bahwa namanya gastric ulcer itu disebabkan oleh adanya asam lambung yang berlebihan yang terkait dengan stres, dengan rokok, dengan kepribadian, dengan kecenderungan bawaan, dan sebagainya. Jadi itu lama baru bisa diterima apa yang diusulkan oleh Barry Marshall. Nah, Eijkman itu sebenarnya justru mirip-mirip begitu, tapi berlainan. Jadi Eijkman itu dari sana. Kembali dulu. Ini slide-nya dari sana ya. Ya, Christian Eijkman itu justru sebaliknya. Christian Eijkman itu mencoba untuk mencari bakteri penyebab beri-beri. Karena beri-beri itu munculnya itu seperti epidemik. Sehingga dipercaya pada waktu itu bahwa penyebabnya justru adalah bakteri. Nah, bukannya ketemu bakteri, malahan Christian Eijkman itu memulai suatu rangkaian penelitian yang akhirnya menemukan kekurangan vitamin sebagai penyebab daripada penyakit beri-beri dan banyak penyakit lain setelah itu. Next. Slide selanjutnya. Ya. Jadi memang beri-beri itu studi itu adalah masalah kesehatan yang sangat besar di abad ke-19 dan sering muncul sebagai suatu epidemi. Epidemi yang kita lihat misalnya tentara kolonial India Belanda itu sangat sulit masuk ke Aceh karena serdadunya ditangsi dan dalam perjalanan itu banyak yang mati karena beri-beri. Ini Rector di HTNI majalah kedokteran Hindia Belanda itu mengatakan bahwa kejadian penyakit itu diamati selama perjalanan dari Batavia ke Aceh, menemukan angka yang rata-rata yang sangat tinggi dan ada kekurangan tanah bumi untuk menguburkan para korban. Hal familiar seperti kita hadapi sekarang ini, suatu epidemi yang besar di penjara dan sebagainya itu epidemi sebetulnya kelihatannya beri-beri ini. Jadi jelas bahwa Eijkman itu tentunya datang dengan satu tim di tahun 1988 mencari kuman, mencari bakteri penyebab beri-beri. Next. Selanjutnya. Jadi, gimana? Kembali dulu, itu udah banyak kan slide-nya.
Slide sebelumnya.
Ya. Sebelumnya lagi. Jadi Pak Sudi, next, ini udah selesai. Next.
Slide berikutnya. Ya.
Nah, jadi ini oke. Jadi waktu Christian Eijkman itu mengamati bahwa ayam yang dia gunakan untuk mengisolasi bakteri penyebab beri-beri, disuntikkan darah dari pasien dan sebagainya, itu semuanya lumpuhan seperti pada beri-beri yang dapat diobati, dapat diperbaiki dengan memberikan beras merah, masih agak sulit untuk keluar dari teori bahwa penyebabnya adalah bakteri. Keluar teori bahwa penyebabnya bakterinya mengeluarkan toksin yang beracun dan sebagainya. Next. Jadi penemuan slide selanjutnya. Slide selanjutnya. Jadi penemuan Eijkman bahwa Polyneuratis kembali lagi. Kembali, bukannya terus.
Slide sebelumnya.
Jadi bisa
ya.
Yang ini, ya. Jadi pada waktu Eijkman menemukan bahwa Polyneuratis kelumpuhan di ayam yang diberi makan beras putih itu dapat disembuhkan dengan beras merah, itu tidak ada yang baru di situ sebetulnya, karena di Jepang pasien dengan memang dikasih makan obat dimakan beras yang belum dipoles itu sembuh. 300 tahun sebelumnya di Ambon, Runvier sudah mengatakan bahwa beri-beri bisa diobati dengan kacang hijau. Tapi apa yang ditemukan oleh Christian Eijkman adalah animal model yang dapat dipakai untuk eksperimen lebih lanjut untuk mencari apa sebenarnya penyebab daripada beri-beri ini. Itu sebenarnya kontribusi dari Christian Eijkman. Nah, penerus dari Christian Eijkman to French, itulah yang sebetulnya dengan menggunakan animal model yang dikembangkan oleh Eijkman itu dapat ada kesimpulan bahwa faktor yang menyebabkan beri-beri itu bukan protein, bukan karbohidrat, bukan gula, bukan lemak. Kalau ayam yang mendapat polineuritis itu diberikan kacang hijau memang sembuh, tapi kasih kacang kedelai tidak sembuh. Dan sampai pada kesimpulan bahwa ada faktor tertentu, bukan protein, bukan karbohidrat, bukan lemak, yang menyebabkan yang kurang pada beras putih itu dan menyebabkan kelaparan sebagian, istilah yang dia pakai partial hunger. Faktor itulah yang kemudian berkembang menjadi penemuan daripada vitamin. Nah, menjawab pertanyaan tadi kan Dr. Doherty cerita bahwa lingkungan yang ada di budaya ilmiah, cara pemikiran yang benar itu penting untuk kita ajarkan kembangkan kepada generasi selanjutnya. Ini sama juga. Jadi di tempat yang sama kan laboratorium Eijkman ke gedung yang baru yang sekarang kita tahu ada di Salemba itu Crane yang memindahkan. Nah, di gedung itu 25 tahun kemudian baru BCP Janssen meneruskan penemuan dari Eijkman, penemuan dari French, bahwa karena masyarakat ilmiah, masyarakat kedokteran, semuanya itu sangat negatif terhadap penemuan dari Eijkman dan French. Ada paper-paper kalau kita cari yang mengatakan bahwa anti-beri-beri factor itu hanya angan-angan yang ada yang mengatakan begitu. Yang mengatakan bahwa makan beras putih tidak ada beri-beri itu susah sekali diterima, seperti pada waktu dari Marshall mengatakan bahwa gastric ulcers itu adalah penyakit yang disebabkan oleh bakteri dan dapat diobati dengan antibiotik. Itu lama meyakinkan sesuatu yang sudah lama diterima di masyarakat dunia.
Pak Sangkot, kalau kita melihat perjalanan karir Christian Eijkman dan sejawat-sejawatnya seperti Heinz dan juga Janssen, yang juga menjadi sangat menarik adalah karena tim penelitian yang
baru 25 tahun yang kemudian
ini juga menjadi ajang bagi peneliti-peneliti biomedis dan kedokteran dari Nusantara. Mungkin Prof. Sangkot bisa memberikan tinjauan pada kita bagaimana anak-anak muda Nusantara kemudian ikut menjadi bagian dalam pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan kedokteran modern di saat ini.
Ya, betul Pak Sudi. Kalau saya bisa minta slide saya kembali, itu slide yang selanjutnya justru menceritakan apa yang Pak Sudi katakan. Jadi dengan penemuan yang besar tadi, itu next ya, selanjutnya. Nah, itu disitulah kita lihat tadi menjawab apa yang Pak Sudi katakan bahwa itu kan laboratorium Eijkman itu dipindahkan ke Salemba. Pindahnya itu adalah tahun 1916. Tahun 1919 itu rumah sakit yang sekarang kita bilang rumah sakit RSCM itu dibangun di sebelahnya. Setahun kemudian Stovia pindah ke sebelahnya. Itu menjadi suatu segitiga di mana terjadi pembangunan scientific culture of excellence, budaya ilmiah yang unggul. Itu yang kemudian menyebar di Indonesia pada waktu itu, pada waktu zaman penjajahan. Dan yang saya ingin tekankan, kalau kita lihat tahunnya itu, Pak Sudi, 1916 itu adalah tahun kedua Perang Dunia Pertama. 1919 itu puncak dari flu Spanyol. Jadi pemerintah, saya nggak tahu, saya belum pernah mempelajari apakah memang pemerintah kolonial itu bisa melihat jauh ke depan pada saat di mana ada krisis ekonomi, krisis kesehatan, justru pemerintahnya menaruh uang untuk membangun fasilitas seperti ini. Ini kembali ke situasi kita pada saat ini. Yang kita bicarakan tadi kan bahwa apakah COVID-19, pandemi COVID-19 ini adalah momen untuk kita mengatakan, oke, sains, ilmu pengetahuan itu penting, seperti tadi kita dengar di sesi pertama, dan walaupun ini ekonominya akan terpuruk dengan adanya COVID-19 ini, tapi membangun scientific basis itu sangat-sangat penting.
Pak Sangkot, selain lingkungan dan atmosfer yang membentuk ilmuwan di masa itu, mungkin Prof. Sangkot bisa membagikan ke kita figur-figur pemuda-pemuda Nusantara yang kemudian menjadi ilmuwan mumpuni di bidangnya. Sayangnya sosok-sosok mereka seperti Profesor Ahmad Muhtar dan Dr. Susilo sangat jarang diketahui oleh generasi muda saat ini, bahkan termasuk yang mempelajari ilmu kedokteran dan kesehatan. Prof. Sangkot mungkin bisa menceritakan pada kita semua sosok-sosok yang terlupakan ini.
Ya, jadi itu tadi yang saya kasih lihat segitiga di Salemba itu, disitulah berkembang ilmu pengetahuan kedokteran yang luar biasa di bumi Nusantara. Tahun 1937 pada waktu Ahmad Muhtar bergabung dengan lembaga Eijkman, itu belum dinamakan lembaga Eijkman, 1938, lalu dalam perayaan 50 tahun laboratorium Eijkman itu, laboratorium tadi dinamakan Eijkman Institute. Pada waktu itu justru Eijkman Institute yang utama di dunia dalam medicine. Nah, itu baru berhenti pada waktu zaman penjajahan Jepang, dan waktu zaman penjajahan Jepang pun tentara pendudukan Jepang masih menghormati apa yang ada di lembaga Eijkman, sehingga lembaga Eijkman itu tetap beroperasi dengan nama lembaga Eijkman, berbeda dengan Pasteur di Bandung yang diambil alih total oleh tentara pendudukan Jepang, dipimpin oleh orang Jepang dan sebagainya. Nah, Mokhtar itu menjadi direktur lembaga Eijkman pada saat itu, direktur pertama yang orang ini. Dan untuk pertama kali juga nama lembaga Eijkman dipakai. Eijkman Institute menjadi lembaga Eijkman. Nah, itu sayangnya adalah Eijkman pada tahun 45 itu seluruh mensabot vaksin yang digunakan untuk mengimunisasi Romusha di Flanders, dan ratusan ribu Romusha itu hampir 1000 Romusha itu yang meninggal dunia karena vaksin PCD yang dibutuhkan kontaminasi dengan tetanus oleh peneliti-peneliti lembaga Eijkman. Vaksin ini dibikinnya di Bandung, di Pasteur Institute, lembaga Pasteur, yang semuanya dijalankan oleh peneliti-peneliti Jepang. Jadi peneliti lembaga Eijkman dijadikan kambing hitam dalam peristiwa itu. Kevin Berg dan saya ada menulis suatu buku Istiqlal tadi, cerita yang sangat penting. Kami baru menemukan makam dari 10 tahun. Dan tadi kalau selain daripada Mokhtar, kami temukan juga di situ makam dari Raden Susilo, Dr. Raden Susilo, yang juga mulai karirnya di lembaga Eijkman. Raden Susilo itu ahli malaria kelas dunia, orang Indonesia.
Pak Sangkot, kita memutar jarum waktu ke depan ketika kemudian lembaga Eijkman dihidupkan kembali berdasarkan inisiatif dari Profesor B.J. Habibie di awal tahun 90-an. Bagaimana Prof. Sangkot bisa membawa kita ke sana, dan kemudian tentu kita banyak yang tahu bahwa Profesor Irawan Yusuf kemudian menjadi salah satu tenaga muda yang ikut bersama tim Prof. Sangkot untuk menghidupkan lembaga yang sangat penting ini.
Boleh saya minta lagi ya? Boleh saya minta slide?
Ada slide mengenai Profesor Ahmad Mokhtar dan juga mengenai pembukaan kembali lembaga Eijkman di awal 1990-an.
Iya, betul. Ya. Slide selanjutnya. Nah, ini yang tadi saya katakan bahwa Ahmad Mokhtar itu dimakamkan di airport Ancol. Tadi saya kasih lihat bagaimana kita meluncurkan buku yang tadi saya sebutkan mengenai peristiwa Klender di Ancol. Nah, itu tanggal itu kita lakukan itu 2 hari sebetulnya kita meluncurkan buku itu. Sengaja kita pilih tanggal 19 September karena tanggal 19 September saya kira Prof. Irawan masih ingat, itu adalah tanggal Presiden Soeharto meresmikan lembaga biologi molekuler Eijkman. Itu kegiatan yang sudah dimulai 3 tahun sebelumnya, tanggal 19 Desember tahun 1990, dengan International Conference yang memperingati 100 tahun penemuan Eijkman terhadap vitamin. Nah, pembangunan next selanjutnya itu selanjutnya ya. Nah, pembangunan lembaga Eijkman sendiri itu baru dimulai dari tahun 1992. Jadi 2 tahun itu masih kita mencoba mencari bagaimana caranya. Saya pulang balik dari Melbourne ke Jakarta tahun 1992, saya permanen pindah ke Jakarta. Itu yang saya terima tahun 1992. Lembaga Eijkman yang gedungnya hampir dihancurkan, gedung bersejarah, Pak Habibie marah sekali. Saya hanya seorang direktur, saya seorang sekretaris, gedung yang hampir rubuh, tidak ada peralatan, tidak ada staf. Nah, Prof. Irawan salah satu yang kemudian membantu saya untuk mengembangkan lembaga Eijkman pada waktu itu. Ada beberapa orang sebetulnya dari Universitas Hasanuddin. Profesor Sangkot sekarang dari
ya, terima kasih Prof. Sangkot.
Kita kaitannya sangat erat yang tidak ada.
Ya, terlihat sekali ada genealogi atau pertautan antara investasi yang begitu besar untuk membangkitkan kembali lembaga Eijkman yang kini berperan sangat penting dalam upaya kita menghadapi COVID-19, beserta juga pengembangan penelitian kedokteran dan kesehatan di lembaga-lembaga lain yang ada di Indonesia, termasuk Universitas Hasanuddin. Kelihatan ada benang merah perjalanan sejarah dan pertautan antar ilmuwan dari generasi yang berbeda. Kita ada Profesor Irawan di kesempatan ini yang tentu bisa memberikan pandangan dan juga pengalamannya sebagai salah satu tenaga ilmu dalam upaya penghidupan kembali lembaga yang sangat penting secara akademik itu. Prof. Irawan, silakan.
Terima kasih, Pak Sudi, Pak Sangkot, dan para panelis yang lain. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Menjadi suatu kehormatan untuk ikut berdiskusi di dalam acara ini tentunya, apalagi dengan kehadiran Profesor Doherty sebagai pemenang hadiah Nobel. Dan kita belajar dari berbagai pengalaman yang kita bisa peroleh selama ini, khususnya terkait dengan upaya kita untuk mengupayakan supaya Indonesia ini juga bisa, ya, entah kapan, untuk menghasilkan pemenang hadiah Nobel tentunya. Tapi inti sebenarnya dari apa yang kita diskusikan ini, mendapat hadiah Nobel itu bukanlah tujuan. Tapi pengalaman saya selama ini, mulai dari mengikuti pendidikan dokter, kemudian pendidikan PhD di Jepang, lalu kemudian bergabung dengan lembaga Eijkman bersama dengan Prof. Sangkot, itu memberikan insight kepada saya bahwa persoalan kita yang paling mendasar adalah budaya akademik. Jadi kalau saya mau ingin memperlihatkan slide saya, ya. Bahwa contoh yang diberikan tadi, baik oleh Profesor Doherty, kemudian apa yang disampaikan Prof. Sangkot, Christian Eijkman, Barry Marshall, yang dapat meraih prestasi yang seperti itu, sebenarnya satu dasarnya, bahwa mereka merupakan pribadi-pribadi yang tidak terkungkung oleh pandangan mainstream apa yang ada pada saat itu, seperti Christian Eijkman, di mana mainstream pada waktu itu bahwa penyakit disebabkan oleh bakteri. Kemudian dia membuktikan bahwa beri-beri bukan disebabkan oleh bakteri, dan itu tidak mudah. Perlu suatu upaya yang panjang yang meyakinkan bahkan pada academic community sendiri. Kemudian Barry Marshall, ya, beliau waktu datang ke Eijkman, saya juga ada, dan kita juga belajar bahwa beliau bisa mencapai apa yang dia capai saat itu adalah karena dia berani berpikir berbeda dari apa yang sudah ada. Nah, menghasilkan orang-orang yang seperti ini bukanlah suatu hal yang mudah. Ada aspek sosial, ada aspek budaya, politik, dan pendidikan yang ada di dalam suatu masyarakat yang memungkinkan karakter seperti ini, perangai seperti ini itu bisa muncul. Nah, inilah salah satu yang paling mendasar yang perlu kita perbaiki sebenarnya. Bahwa apa yang bisa dicapai oleh orang-orang seperti itu adalah karena mereka berani berpikir berbeda. Nah, pertanyaan, kultur kita, aspek sosial kita, politik, dan pendidikan kita, apakah mendukung terciptanya manusia-manusia seperti itu? Nah, tentu saja itu tidak cukup. Ada orang-orang di Indonesia ini pun, ada orang-orang yang berani mengambil hal lain, berpikir cara lain. Tapi itu tidak cukup untuk membuat sesuatu yang perubahan yang sangat signifikan. Dia hidup di dalam suatu kultur akademik. Apakah itu di perguruan tinggi, apakah di institusi riset, budaya akademik inilah atau kultur akademik inilah yang merupakan juga persoalan yang harus kita tumbuhkan. Yang sampai saat ini kita masih belum punya budaya akademik. Pengalaman Prof. Sangkot bersama kami dalam mengelola berbagai skim riset, itu dari situ kita dapat belajar apa sebenarnya permasalahan. Bahkan sampai saat ini sekalipun, upaya-upaya itu belum mendapat tempat yang layak di dalam masyarakat kita. Nah, yang persoalan yang paling mendasar kalau budaya akademik itu tidak tumbuh di perguruan tinggi atau di lembaga riset, tempat di mana karakter-karakter ini bisa subur. Nah, saya melihat ada satu hal yang pasti banyak. Pasti kita bicara soal funding, pasti kita bicara soal infrastruktur, pasti kita kita berbicara tentang sumber daya manusia yang ada. Tetapi hal yang paling mendasar yang kita harus atasi secara sistemik itu pertama adalah bagaimana budaya akademik ini yang ada di institusi riset, ada di institusi pendidikan, khususnya di perguruan tinggi itu bisa tumbuh. Kalau leadership-nya itu sampai saat ini, kalau tidak salah saya dan Prof. Sangkot 2 minggu lalu masih berdiskusi mengenai masalah ini dengan teman-teman di Dana Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia, bahwa tidak akan tumbuh budaya akademik ini kalau kepemimpinan itu masih kepemimpinan birokratik. Ini sangat dalam permasalahannya. Ya, sangat dalam. Skim-skim riset dibuatkan penilaian, dibuatkan konsep-konsep masih berbasis kepada itu. Mengutamakan laporan-laporan yang sifatnya administratif daripada scientific achievement yang diperoleh dari situ. Nah, apa yang menjadi hambatan bagi tumbuhnya budaya akademik dalam suatu kepemimpinan yang birokratik ini? Pertama, bahwa kepemimpinan birokratik itu kan dasarnya adalah kewenangan. Kewenangan, siapa yang berwenang, apapun yang dia melakukan, itu dasarnya adalah itu. Berbeda dengan scientific leadership, yang dasarnya adalah expertise, kepakaran. Siapa yang paling pakar, itu yang memberikan kontribusi. Sistem rekrutmen, kalau di bureaucratic leadership itu ya kedekatan kita dengan siapa yang punya kewenangan, bukan berdasarkan sistem merit, mencari yang terbaik. Pola komunikasi, kalau di bureaucratic leadership itu instruksi. Kalau di scientific leadership itu dialog. Hubungan di dalam suatu sistem, dalam suatu institusi, dalam bureaucratic leadership itu atasan bawahan. Kalau di scientific leadership itu kesejawatan, kolegialitas. Nah, kalau orang-orang yang punya potensi tadi, yang sudah sekolah di mana-mana, dari luar negeri, dari mana, kembali masuk ke dalam suatu institusi yang budaya akademiknya itu tidak tumbuh dengan baik karena leadership-nya itu birokratik leadership, kita bisa bayangkan kita lost human capital yang luar biasa yang kita seharusnya bisa manfaatkan. Nah, jadi menurut saya begitu banyak persoalan, tapi hal yang paling perlu kita lakukan adalah membangun budaya akademik ini, menghasilkan orang-orang yang punya perangai ilmiah, yang bisa membawa bangsa ini, masyarakat ini, menjadi masyarakat yang juga punya apapun dia, tapi cara berpikir mereka selalu berbasis kepada scientific information dan sebagainya. Nah, bayangkan sekarang pandemi ini memberikan kita gambaran bahwa mengapa semakin jelas bahwa budaya akademik itu tumbuh. Karena orang-orang yang bekerja dalam institusi akademik sekalipun dalam pandemi ini, banyak keputusannya, banyak tindakannya tidak berbasis kepada scientific information yang betul-betul bisa diandalkan. Kenapa? Karena kembali, Anda bisa, tidak usah saya sebut lagi, polemik yang ada selama pandemi ini, yang justru berasal dari institusi riset, institusi pendidikan, yang orang-orangnya tidak mempunyai perangai ilmiah yang tepat, yang memberikan informasi yang tepat kepada kita, kepada masyarakat, bagaimana menghadapi pandemi ini. Dan kalau dari Pak Sangkot tadi sudah sampaikan beberapa perjalanan sejarah, akhirnya pilihan pemikiran saya adalah bahwa kita mau mengulang sejarah atau belajar dari sejarah.
Ya, Pak Irawan,
ya.
Kalau kita melihat pandemi COVID-19 ini sekaligus sebagai sebuah krisis dan juga sebagai sebuah peluang, apakah COVID-19 ini bisa menjadi jendela peluang untuk membangkitkan atau memperkuat apa apa yang disebut sebagai komunikasi mengenai kebenaran ilmiah, dan bagaimana juga budaya akademik yang sudah mulai unggul di beberapa titik-titik penting seperti di lembaga Eijkman bisa dibuat menjadi lebih menyebar dalam konteks Indonesia saat ini. Itu dua pertanyaan yang diajukan oleh hadirin kita saat ini, Pak Satrio Yusuf dan juga dari Nana Saleh, Koordinator Riset Australia-Indonesia Center. Pak Irawan, silakan.
Ya. Yang kita hadapi ini persoalan yang sangat mendasar dan sistemik, gitu ya. Sangat sistemik. Jadi budaya ilmiah yang menjadi dasar dari seorang saintis ya, di dalam melakukan risetnya, melakukan pengembangannya, maupun mengkomunikasikan apa yang mereka lakukan, itu dua hal yang berbeda. Jadi saya mencatat baik-baik apa yang disampaikan Profesor Doherty, bahwa beliau adalah bukanlah orang yang suka muncul, ya. Bukan publik ini yang senang muncul untuk menyampaikan hal-hal yang mungkin bagi beliau hal-hal yang sangat teknis, dan nah di kita ini kembali karena hampir boleh katakan semua saintis-saintis yang bagus kita itu hidup bekerja dalam institusi riset maupun perguruan tinggi yang budaya akademiknya belum tumbuh, karena itu tadi bahwa dia hidup di dalam suatu institusi yang sangat besar pengaruh birokratik leadership ini, mulai dari rektornya, direkturnya, bahkan menterinya, berpikir begitu. Nah, kembali bahwa banyak hal-hal yang akhirnya bukan ditentukan oleh scientific decision, scientific informasi atau fakta scientific, tapi lebih mengaruhi keputusan itu keputusan populis atau enggak. Jadi ada population dan scientific versus scientific. Nah, kembali cara berpikir birokrat leadership ini sangat lebih condong selalu pada populisme dibandingkan fakta-fakta saintifik. Nah, ini kembali lagi bahwa sepanjang kita punya institusi di mana para saintis ini hidup, para saintis ini bekerja, masih seperti itu, maka sulit untuk kita butuh waktu untuk memperbaiki hal seperti ini. Karena apa? Saya mau ke slide saya yang berikut. Melakukan perubahan itu tidak bisa 1, 2, 3, 4 orang. Kita butuh critical mass. Inilah mimpi Prof. Sangkot dengan lembaga Eijkman. Menjadi tempat di mana kita membangun critical mass dengan berbagai skim riset di masa lalu. Tapi orang-orang ini dari UI, dari UNHAS, dari Erlangga, balik masing-masing membangun itu di berbagai tempat. Nah, kita mengalami persoalan bahwa mungkin dari sudut jumlah ya, sudah cukup besar, tapi apakah dia bisa jadi critical mass untuk punya daya ungkit yang besar? Seperti yang kita harapkan untuk mencapai scientific atau research excellence. Karena ini lingkaran yang sangat critical mass yang cukup akan meningkatkan kapasitas untuk kita mengembangkan scientific research yang excellent. Dari situ kita mampu mendapat research grant dari mana-mana pun, tidak tergantung dari apa yang sudah disediakan oleh pemerintah. Kalau memang Anda punya kapasitas seperti itu, kenapa mesti bersaing dengan mengambil dana yang terbatas dari pemerintah Indonesia? Mengapa tidak berani compete di international grant atau industrial grant? Sehingga kita tidak lagi terfokus pada apa yang disiapkan pemerintah Indonesia. Karena di luar sana sangat banyak. Saya kira itu.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Irawan dan Pak Sangkot. Waktu kita mendekati akhir dan kita ingin mendengarkan final wrap up dari Pak Sangkot maupun Pak Irawan. Kira-kira untuk kepentingan mendorong critical mass bagi peneliti-peneliti muda kita dan juga membuat bibit-bibit yang sudah ada yang mulai mumpuni di bidangnya bisa berkembang menjadi lebih baik. Pesan apa kira-kira yang bisa disampaikan berdasarkan pengalaman personal dan profesional Pak Sangkot dan Pak Irawan? Pak Sangkot, silakan. Sambil menunggu Pak Sangkot bergabung kembali, Pak Irawan silakan memberikan final comment.
Pak Sangkot sudah masuk tuh?
Ya, Prof Sangkot silakan Prof.
Saya dulu ya.
Ya.
Tadi yang diceritakan oleh Prof Irawan itu memang disitulah intinya. Tapi pertanyaan tadi ya, bagaimana kita bisa, ini kan tantangan yang kita hadapi ini besar sekali. Pertanyaan nomor satu tuh mulainya dari mana? Mulainya dari mana itu yang sulit dijawab. Kita dulu punya Pak Habibie yang punya visi ke depan. Kita di lembaga Eijkman semua tahu, Prof Irawan tahu, bahwa misi kita sebetulnya adalah mengembangkan budaya dengan tadi bola salju tadi yang dikatakan oleh Prof Irawan. Eijkman sendiri itu adalah eksperimen, di mana apabila kita potong rantai birokrasi dengan lembaganya akan bebas tadi mengembangkan apa yang dikatakan oleh Prof Irawan. Ganti pemerintah kan ganti policy. Walaupun kalau kita pikir dalam undang-undang pembukaan undang-undang dasar kita itu sudah dikatakan bahwa salah satu dari 3 tujuan kita bernegara adalah mencerdaskan kehidupan bangsa. Tapi berbeda dengan India yang mencerdaskannya itu memang tertulis dalam undang-undangnya itu adalah dengan melalui perangai ilmiah, peningkatan perangai ilmiah. Kita tuh belum mendefinisikan apa yang kita maksud dengan
cerdaskan kehidupan
bangsa yang cerdas, itu kita belum tahu. Nah, karena kita masih belum menentu kemana definisinya, Presiden kita sekarang kan juga mengatakan kita perlu revolusi mental. Tapi revolusi mentalnya seperti apa, belum tahu kita apa definisinya. Jadi yang paling tepat bisa kita lakukan pada saat ini adalah apa yang dikembangkan bola salju tadi kita teruskan di tingkat lembaga, di tingkat kita berbicara seperti sekarang. ALMI itu salah satu daripada alat kita untuk mengembangkan budaya ilmiah yang tinggi tadi. Dana ilmu pengetahuan Indonesia kalau bisa kita selamatkan di Prof Irawan dan saya itu sangat penting. Nah disitulah kita sebetulnya bisa nanti memaksakan budaya penelitian, budaya research, budaya ilmiah yang unggul itu berkembang. Saya kira kita harus mulai dari bawah sambil kita secara politis mencoba untuk ini Pak Satu IP berusaha untuk berubah dari atas, tapi kita tidak boleh menunggu dari atas. Saya kira begitu.
Ya, menggulirkan bola salju dan juga kita tidak bisa menunggu dari atas. Pak Irawan, silahkan memberikan final comment untuk acara kita hari ini.
Ya, terima kasih. Ya, jadi susah memang menginikan saya dengan Prof Sangkot karena kita sama-sama bertumbuh, berupaya untuk membuat scientific community di Indonesia ini, scientific research ini berkembang. Jadi itu. Jadi pemikiran-pemikiran kita itu sama. Jadi memang pertama kali sudah jangan terlalu mengharap dari atas. Karena dibandingkan dengan waktu lembaga Eijkman baru dimulai, kondisi kita saat ini sudah jauh lebih baik. Dalam artian bahwa jumlah saintis kita, baik yang berasal dari luar maupun dari dalam, itu sudah cukup. Kedua, saintis kita yang kerja di luar juga, yang apa namanya itu, diaspora itu juga sudah semakin banyak. Nah, tinggal sekarang bagaimana pada level lembaga ini memanfaatkan momentum yang ada saat ini. Pandemi ini memberikan kita pelajaran bahwa menggunakan cara-cara lama tidak akan pernah bisa memperbaiki masa depan. Masalah yang kita hadapi sekarang ini, kita menghadapi masalah pandemi yang sangat lain sama sekali dengan masih menggunakan cara-cara lama kita. Nah, ini yang mesti kita berani keluar dari situ. Nah, kita mempunyai beberapa modal. Tadi Profesor Sangkot sudah katakan ALMI. Tinggal sekarang ALMI ini bagaimana dia bisa bergulir, membangun bola salju yang besar, sehingga menjadi critical mass yang punya daya ungkit. Keep your connection, collaboration dengan tempat di mana Anda berasal. Kalau mau contoh itu lembaga Eijkman ya begitu awalnya. Datang dengan Prof. Sangkot, bawa semua dia punya ini dari UNHAS, lalu mulai dari situ datang orang dari Airlangga, datang orang dari UNHAS, datang orang menjadi satu ini. Ya, jadi kita jangan ini harus mulai dari bawah. Tentu saja ada upaya-upaya orang pada level atas, Akademi Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia, Kemenristek dan sebagainya untuk memperbaiki tata kelola manajemen riset di Indonesia yang lebih ke arah membangun budaya ilmiah, bukan birokratik leadership. Nah, itu. Tapi itulah tugas di atas. Tapi yang di bawah ini, kalian yang muda-muda, manfaatkan seluruh potensi yang ada, networking yang ada, bangun itu semua. Jangan compete pada level Indonesia, compete di luar, dan inilah cara-cara yang kita harapkan bisa dilakukan oleh yang grup ALMI atau researcher muda yang ada di universitas, yang menurut saya kalau mampu dikelola secara optimal luar biasa sebenarnya potensi kita. Jauh lebih ini dibandingkan waktu Prof. Sangkot memulai lembaga Eijkman 30 tahun yang lalu. Gitu. Saya kira itu, Pak Sudi.
Terima kasih, Prof. Irawan. Saya ingin menekankan kembali sesuatu yang bernada optimis. Ada silver line bahwa kondisi kita saat ini dibandingkan beberapa dasawarsa lalu sudah lebih baik, sudah ada critical mass yang bergulir, jumlah saintis kita di dalam negeri maupun di luar negeri bertambah, dan karena itu kita memiliki kewajiban atau kepatutan untuk mendorong dari lembaga di mana kita bekerja dan memanfaatkan segala potensi yang ada. Mendorong dari bawah sambil menunggu iklim atmosfer akademik dan ilmiah yang lebih mendukung dari.
Ada Pak Sudi, ada satu kayak ini. Waktu kami mengelola Eijkman dengan Prof. Sangkot, itu hampir semua jalur-jalur birokrasi kita tidak lakukan. Kita membangun itu betul-betul ya, saya nggak bisa omongkan di sini, tapi itu bisa kita bangun dengan sama sekali melakukan hal yang berbeda. Sehingga resources yang terbatas, pada waktu itu funding yang terbatas, human resources yang terbatas, kita bisa manfaatkan seoptimal mungkin sampai Eijkman bisa berkembang. Begitu saya kembali ke UNHAS, saya mau contohin itu, sama sekali tidak ada peluang untuk itu. Itu contoh.
Ya, membangun lembaga baru dan juga yang lebih penting lagi membangun budaya ilmiah yang baru tentu memang tidak selalu mudah. Tetapi seperti yang disampaikan Prof. Sangkot dan Prof. Irawan tadi, kita melihat critical mass yang tahap demi tahap semakin bertambah, yang mungkin untuk kita hubungkan dengan presentasi Pak Sangkot kemarin, menyambungkan kita dengan semangat pionir dari pendahulu-pendahulu kita yang mendorong pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan modern di awal abad 20 lalu seperti Profesor Ahmad Mokhtar, Dr. Susilo, yang dengan segala keterbatasan di zaman itu bisa berkontribusi bukan hanya dalam skala Nusantara, tapi bahkan dalam skala dunia. Tujuan dari sesi kita hari ini bersama Profesor Peter Doherty adalah untuk menyalakan dan tetap menghidupkan energi optimisme itu, sehingga semoga titik-titik excellence bisa terhubung dari banyak tempat di Indonesia, bahkan di luar Indonesia, di dunia internasional. Bapak Ibu, para hadirin sekalian, dengan demikian sesi kita webinar bersama Nobel Laureate Professor Doherty telah berakhir dan kita akan bertemu kembali dalam webinar-webinar menginspirasi lainnya. Terima kasih sekali lagi kepada Eugene Sebastian dan tim dari Australia-Indonesia Center, dan juga terkhusus kepada Profesor Doherty yang telah meluangkan waktunya, dan tentu juga kepada Profesor Dwia Aristina Pulubuhu, dan juga Profesor Sangkot Marzuki, Profesor Irawan Yusuf, dan Profesor Jamaluddin Jompa yang telah mengayakan diskusi kita hari ini, dan tidak kalah pentingnya peran para peserta sekalian. Terima kasih atas waktunya dan atas diskusinya. Sampai bertemu lagi di sesi berikutnya bersama Australia-Indonesia Center dan Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore.
Selamat sore. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Pak Sudi. Terima kasih Prof. Sangkot, Prof. Irawan.